Hi guys. All right, so it's been about a week and a half since I've popped in to say hi to you guys. Yeah, I do that on purpose. Last week, week 4, was all about, excuse me, was all about giving you time to read, right? And I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to focus, if I'm trying to concentrate, I don't want somebody popping in all the time, talking to me, telling me what to do, right? I mean, think about it. Libraries are quiet for a reason, right? Week 4, I give you that space, I give you that quiet to jump in, to start your reading and get yourself going. But we are now in week 5, and actually, we are approaching the end of week 5, which means we are approaching the end of our unit 2. It's time for a bit of a pop in here and some instructor message. Now, just a heads up, this one is going to be a little lengthy because I am kind of covering 2 weeks in this one message, but stick with me till the end because it's worth it. All right. Well, first, let me just kind of remind you where we came from and where we're at now, right? So, when we were with our unit 1, we were focused on building that strong foundation, right? It was practicing communicating clearly, organizing your ideas, considering, who you are communicating with through your writing. And of course, our main focus was working through writing as a process, right? Those foundational skills, well, they don't disappear, right? That's what makes them foundational, right? There are building blocks that we start with. So they didn't disappear as we moved into our next unit where we're at now. Instead, we started building from that foundation. So last week, I've already mentioned reading. Reading became center stage. It got all that spotlight last week. So instead of reading simply to understand the words on the screen, right? Looking at the words and knowing what the words mean, you had to begin reading to recognize the words, sure, but those words together, what key ideas were being made. You had to read in order to understand how those ideas then connected to your own thinking, right? Because your own opinion was the basis or the starting point for your research. But then you had to take those ideas and determine how they connect not just to your opinion, but to your writing, right? How those ideas are going to start fitting in with your ideas. All right, now, what that process is called. So, again, it's reading to recognize the words, it's reading to recognize ideas, it's understanding that those ideas have to connect to your own thoughts and your own view, and then starting to figure out how to present or how to communicate those connected thoughts, right? That is literally called the cycle of reading comprehension, right? And I know you guys know that phrase, reading comprehension, right? We've probably heard it since kindergarten, right? What you did last week absolutely focused to reading comprehension. Now, the building from that, right? Because we're building and building and building. That's what growth is. Um, what good is reading comprehension if you don't understand the actual information that you are, in fact, reading? So, sorry, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I stay on topic. So that's where that idea of information literacy came in last week, and what you're practicing throughout this unit and even into the next. Remember, though, information literacy, it means that you're not simply accepting information at face value, right? Just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. Right? Instead, you are learning and you are practicing how to locate credible sources, how to evaluate the reliability of the information, right? So the credibility and the reliability. You are learning and practicing how to recognize potential misgivings. That's a nice word to also call biases, or sometimes even just flat out lies, right? Or untrue information. You also are practicing in that information literacy how to make thoughtful decisions about which information actually deserves, right? Because this is your work, right? What information deserves a place in your work, right? So that's the idea of recognizing our sources, being able to understand what we're actually looking at and decipher if it is quality or not, what makes quality or not, and then how to make choices and decide what do we want to stand by, right? What pieces do we want to bring into our work to support ourselves and to support our ideas? Now, that was week 4, right? We're now in week 5. So this week, you are starting to move beyond that reading, move beyond that decision making, and you're moving into your drafting, your revising, and your polishing proofreading, right? So as that continues, the goal is no longer to simply get your words onto a page in a way someone else could understand. I mean, remember, that was unit 1, and yes, we are continuing to build from there, but this next step this week, this next step in writing clearly and logically naturally moves to the idea of writing with a specific purpose. So, as the overview and the assignments requirements explained, right, you are summarizing, you're justifying, and you are explaining your information as if you were writing to a classmate who had never read any of the sources you found. All right, one thing I hoped you noticed throughout this unit was that stronger writing usually begins with stronger reading. Now, this was hinted at, right, in unit 1 simply through the reading of the instructions for the challenge, the lessons that you had with, the activities that you had. Reading did absolutely come into play, and it was even brought up as part of that pre-writing step. But for a lot of students, that remains kind of surface level until you get to unit 2. So if you found yourself struggling to begin writing this unit where we are now, I can say with 100% certainty and all the faith in the world that your struggle wasn't because you couldn't write, right? More often than not, if you're experiencing struggle with this unit, it simply means you need more time in your pre-writing. That means you're reading, you're taking of notes through your reading, whether they're mental notes, excuse me, guys, I'm sorry, or physical notes, right? You need to ask more questions. You simply need to develop your understanding before the writing itself can become easier. Pre-writing, stressed in our unit 1, and you're experiencing it now here truly in our unit 2. That pre-writing step, that thinking, that understanding, that reading, that researching, the asking questions, right? Everything that goes into comprehension in various forms, right? That absolutely is the most important aspect of the entire writing process, undoubtedly. Again, and I know I said this in unit 1, I'm going to repeat it here again. You have to understand what you want to write about or what you want to communicate before you can actually write it or communicate it. All right, that idea though is actually connected perfectly to one of the activities we had on the schedule for week 5. That is the MLA citation exercise. So I don't say anything at first. I let it sit and I let you guys experience it for yourselves because that is called experiential learning, guys. By the way, that means you learn by doing instead of being told. But we're now towards the end of week 5, so I can finally get on here and I can talk to you guys a little bit about this now that enough of you have engaged with it and have participated in it. All right, so let me get to my notes. Sorry, I'm staying on topic here. All right, so I want to remind you what that exercise is intended and what it exists as. All right. So first off, I called it an exercise because that is exactly what it is. It is an exercise. It is not some big test. It's not some big quiz. It's not some assessment. I think that's what Blackboard uses as the word, right? It's an exercise. It's a training, right? It's worth a whole 11 participation points. So those of you who worry about that aspect, right? It's okay, right? Breathe for a second. Its purpose isn't to prove that you've mastered MLA formatting. Its purpose is to help you begin building the habits that eventually lead to accurate ethical communication, right? I think we all understand that we have to give credit when we borrow something. We can't just like take it, that's stealing, and we can't lie about it, that's manipulation and stealing, right? So the idea behind why we cite is a very simple one that I firmly believe every single one of you, quite frankly, you already know right from wrong, right? You get the very basic why we cite. So the focus isn't on the why necessarily here, right? The focus is on building the habits that ensure we always choose right versus wrong. Right. So with this particular exercise, I want you to think about physical strength for just a second. You don't walk into a gym, lift the heaviest weight once, and suddenly become a bodybuilder, right? You're not any stronger after you do that. Strength comes from repetition with gradually increasing challenge. MLA citations in comp, right? And specifically, even this exercise was built in this exact same way. And I'm actually, before I move on, I'm going to share my screen with you. I hope I can. Let me try to get over here. Sorry, I'm having to deal with technology. Give me just a second. Bear with me. Here we go. Got it. So if you happen to be seeing my notes right now, that's okay. Let me get in here. Okay, so what you should be seeing on the screen is our actual MLA citations quick overview. Okay, so I just want to kind of briefly roll through this here, right? So again, that idea that we are approaching this with repetition and that we're approaching this with increased challenge, that was in the build here, right? We started with identifying the type of source, and you can kind of see these questions. So if you were somebody who struggled with identifying your type of source, what I usually find with students is that they're trying to operate in a gray area with their thoughts with this. So the one that typically trips people up is question number 2, actually. And it's simply, what type of source is CNN.com? So that one's a great example of intention versus literal use. For example, CNN.com is intended to be a news site, right? A news outlet, but in its very literal sense, it is a website, right? It's not a news article. In a very literal sense, a news article means an article from a newspaper. And CNN.com is not a paper. It is a news outlet, right? It's either a television channel or it's a website. There is not a CNN newspaper. Okay, so the answer to that one would be website. Okay, so it's when I see students struggle with that first step, right? Identifying the type of source. Again, it boils down to a very literal thinking. Okay, and then as we move down here to kind of the second section, right? And that's that idea of navigating these sources, right? We are stepping up our weight a little bit, right? being able to navigate is that idea of finding all the little bits of information that are important versus not important for our need, and being able to accurately identify what is what, things like title and author and stuff like that. So whenever you're moving through that, I don't tend to have too many students struggle with this. Where the struggle usually starts to come in is when we have to start kind of open-ended questioning these, right? Or answering these. And the struggle starts to come into the details of it all. Maybe the word like "the" is missing, or maybe we've misspelled an author's last name. Maybe we put the last name first and then the first name, or vice versa, depending on the need, right? So it's tiny little details that start to come into play. Again, our increase in challenge. And then as we get towards the end of this exercise, we start looking at actual formatting, right? And the formatting kind of brings in that idea of, do we understand what we're looking at, right? Are we very literally understanding, is this print or online? Is this a website or is this a database? Can we identify who the authors are, what the titles are, who published it, what the page numbers are, what year was it published, right? And then it's this idea and practice in accuracy. Can we look at a sample from Purdue OWL style guide, or from Google, or some of you maybe even chose to go AI on this one. There was no limitation here, right? You could use resources that you found helpful. But could you look at those samples, those templates, and could you take the information that you identified earlier, right? The titles, the names, the page numbers, and could you match it to the template? So it's very much increased weight, even though matching doesn't sound hard. If you didn't understand, or if you weren't correct in that very first step, right, that early on of what kind of source is it, well, when you look at a sample or a template, it's probably going to look incorrect, right? Because that is how MLA works. If you don't identify your type of source, right, if you don't have your information literacy correct, then your template to follow is not going to be correct. Guys, I get how confusing all of this sounds. So give me just a second here. I'm going to pop back over. Let me get out of my share. And we're going to get back to my notes here. All right. So I get how confusing all of that sounds. So that is why we don't have a lesson like that. That is why it is experiential versus being told, right? It is wildly, wildly insane for myself, or really any teacher, to stand there or sit there in a video and say, guys, this is easy. This is just how it happens, because it's not. So I'm going to break this down very quickly for you in the way that this exercise is intended, right? We've already covered that it's meant for repetition. And actually at the very top of that exercise page, it actually said, keep returning, right? Keep coming back, keep trying. That's how learning happens. All right, so first, again, you're identifying the type of source. Guys, that was your first little practice in analysis. Next, you located the important pieces of information within a source, the things like the title, the author, that stuff for your citation. That required reading comprehension and information literacy, because you had to recognize what information mattered for the citation and where to find it. And then third, you had to organize those little bits of information in a way that your audience, which in this case is MLA formatting, right? In a way that your audience either expected or required to receive them, right? That's where a little taste in accuracy came into play. To successfully work through all three of those steps, you also had to practice two habits that are often very much harder than they sound. First, repetitive effort, and second, sustained attention to detail. Those are not habits or skills. You can decide what you want to call them. Those are not things we are born with. Those are things that have to develop and grow and get stronger. And those two habits are where most of the learning actually happens. All right, now, some of you asked for some feedback on your own submissions, right? And I've already shared this with a few of you who reached out, but I always share it with the whole class when this time comes. This process, and particularly this exercise, can make people uncomfortable. And that's putting it nicely. Kind of taking it back to my analogy with the gym, right? When we're lifting weights, it makes your muscles work hard enough to sweat, right? Your body sweats because you're getting a good workout. This kind of learning, where it's repetitive, it's experiential, it is forcefully, right? It's forcing you to aim for details and accuracy, right? Some people might call that tedious work, right? But this kind of learning, just like lifting weights makes you sweat, this learning makes your brain work hard enough to mentally sweat, right? That feeling of slowing down, of checking your work, trying again, finding another small mistake, and then making another correction, and then checking it again, being unsure. That's not failure, guys. That is the workout, right? So if you've attempted the MLA citation exercise 2 or 3 times, I even see a few of you have done it 4 times, right? And you've watched your score gradually improve, that is fantastic. It doesn't really matter where your score started, right? If you're seeing an improvement, whether it is small or big, again, that doesn't matter either. It is the fact that you are repeating and that you are sustaining, right? That is wonderful. That is where your pat on the back comes in. All right, now understand by doing this, you've started building habits, right? You've put in some repetitions and your brain has done some sweating. It's getting stronger. Keep using those same habits as you revise and proofread your research summary, right? These habits are called habits and skills because they're meant to last, right? It's not a one and done kind of deal. Now, for those of you who haven't quite jumped into the exercise yet, sorry guys, now is the perfect time to start, okay? So don't think of it as a quiz. I've already explained that. Think of it as a practice, as a training, right? Every attempt gives you another repetition, another opportunity to strengthen the skills, strengthen the habits that you will continue using, obviously, in our course, but you're going to continue using these in your other courses and out there in that professional work world someday. All right, now I do want to leave you with one more little note about that MLA citations exercise. And this is specifically noted for those who, when I say it feels uncomfortable, you might be using a different word, right? I want you to, for just a second, imagine if your entire research summary grade depended on whether you formatted your citations correctly, right? Think about that. One comma out of place, that technically means it's not formatted correctly. And does that mean it should make or break your entire work, right? I think most of you, if not all of you, would probably feel that that would be incredibly unfair, right? If your entire work was judged on a missing V or a missing comma. And guys, I'm right there with you, right? That would be really unfair. At this point in your Comp1 learning journey, right? expecting absolute citation accuracy would be way unrealistic. It would be unrealistic on my part. And I think some of you need to hear this too. It's unrealistic on your part, right? Don't hold yourself to that standard. That's not what I'm looking for yet because it's not realistic. What I'm looking for right now, right, as of this video, as of this week, what I am looking for are the habits that produce accuracy over time. And again, that's analysis, that's reading comprehension, information literacy, sustained attention to detail, and the willingness to keep trying even when something feels difficult. These habits are what you're strengthening right now. That is what that little 11-point participation based exercise is getting you into the mindset of, right? And for some of you, the physical set, right? Having to return. So as you are growing these strengths, right? These habits are exactly what you're going to need as we move into our next unit, right? So as we move into unit 3, figure that's enough talk about our MLA exercise. As we move into unit 3 next week, you will be analyzing your information. You're going to be making connections across your sources. You're going to be recognizing patterns, evaluating ideas, developing your own evidence-based arguments. In other words, all of the skills and habits you built throughout units 1 and 2 will be working all together, right? That is what is called analytical thinking. I hope you're beginning to see, or not beginning really, I hope you're seeing that strong writing isn't just about putting words on a page or on a screen, right? It's about understanding your information. It's about thinking carefully about that information and communicating your ideas in ways that help other people understand your reasoning, which, guys, that is where we're headed next. Okay, but I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself. Sometimes I do that. We've got to first finish this Unit 2 research summary project, right? So it is due this Sunday, right? And as always, if you have questions, if you have uh, anything that needs to be clarified or cleared up, do not hesitate to send me a message. I will answer it as soon as I see it and as fast as I can. All right, guys, I told you this was going to be a lengthy one, but you're doing great. Keep it up. And remember, you're learners, right? Be kind to yourself, but also keep stepping up to the challenge. Keep asking for feedback. You're doing great. All right, guys, I will see you later. Bye.